Well, thank you very much for inviting me along this evening. I have been to quite a few of the talks over recent weeks, and I found them to be absolutely fascinating. So thank you very much for giving me a share of the screen. So good evening, my name is Andy Cuff. I run a small cybersecurity business from the beautiful city of Bath, and I've been asked to talk tonight about what we do and some of the cybersecurity issues associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. Choosing just a few topics for this evening has been traumatic. I had a run through of a small subset of what I wanted to talk about this afternoon, and it got to 25 minutes. So you'll be pleased to know I've managed to include all the other slides, and I should be here for about 3 hours, all being well. Just kidding. I have actually cut it down somewhat earlier this evening. So without further ado, he says, there we go. So what do we do at C&D, Computer Network Defense? It's really difficult because we've got about 50 different services that we offer, from all sorts of things, from super yacht security right the way through to education. But I'm going to just cover a few of the topics today. Hopefully some of those topics might be interesting. So the other thing is, I think I might turn off subtitles because that's just come up as from soupy something or other. So let me just turn that off because I found that quite distracting, because I think it's programmed for a different language, of which English isn't it. So anyway. So looking at what we do, breaking it down, we've got offensive security. Now, offensive security is basically we put ourselves into the shoes of an attacker. So we will attack a client's network as though we were one of the bad people and let them know the kind of things that we're seeing. One of those is a penetration test where we're trying to hack into the client's network and see how far we can get, if anywhere. Taking penetration testing to another level is red teaming. With red teaming, we look at every aspect of security and we leave no stone unturned. Quite often the client will say, do whatever you want. We just want to know where the vulnerabilities would lie. As an example, we were approached by a manufacturing company from near Oxford that produce electrical switchgear, these massive beasts of things weighing hundreds of tons. Their concern was that they would release a new product, and then within 2 weeks of releasing that intricate piece of equipment, the Chinese had produced an exact duplicate and were selling it for a fraction of the cost. Their concern was that their research, their prototypes had been leaked, and they asked us to come in and see what we could do to, or how it would be possible, if at all, to basically get these, the designs of these prototypes. So with the penetration testing, we found one of their web cameras had been put onto the internet, and it was also connected. This was so that they could host video conferences. I don't think they use Zoom. They hosted video conferences through this webcam, but they'd also connected it to the inside of their network. It was running a Linux operating system, and we were able to break through it into the network. Inside the network itself, we quickly found some of the prototypes in the folders. They hadn't got any security around the folders where they stored all the prototype diagrams, etc. But we took it to another level. We thought, right, okay, what else is out there? We know that, so basically with the red teaming side and the social engineering side, we just sat in the car park and watched what they were doing. They started work at around 7 a.m. Reception opened at 7, but they were finished early in the afternoon. Generally speaking, they were all in jeans and t-shirts. So we thought, right, okay, that's what we'll do. I turned up at 6:30 in the morning and waited outside reception until some kind soul let me into reception. I was able to get a visitor's pass, and I was able to get a high-vis jacket, and off I went onto the site. We knew where the design studio was and where they had the prototypes. And I just waited outside. It was actually two of us, had a clipboard. And obviously if you've got a clipboard and a high vis jacket, you can go anywhere you want. We waited by a vending machine until someone went into the lab, and just followed them in, started taking photographs. We weren't challenged. Now, part of that is, so obviously, if the designs are going to be leaked abroad, the chances are they're not going to come over to the UK and try and do exactly what we did. The risk is extremely high if there's better ways of doing it. So we discounted that to some degree, but what we're able to report on is the security culture. The culture in the organization. And we did some dumpster diving as well, which means we go into the skip and take out waste paper. We took out one bag, and at the top of the bag was shredded paper, as you'd expect. And what I was hoping to find was they weren't using a cross-cut shredder, which means you can reconstitute what's on that paper. In reality, they underneath that shredded paper, which was cross-cut, was the actual prototype designs that someone had just chucked in the bin, and they hadn't bothered shredding them. The security guard waved to us as we picked up stuff out the skip, which I thought was remarkable. Anyway, that was that red teaming episode. And I realized I've just talked for a bit too long now. Phishing assessments is something else we do. We will, phishing is basically bait. So an attacker will send an email that looks luring enough for you to either click on the link or open the attachment. And that will then take you off to either steal some credentials through a fake website, or it might even have some malicious code. And what we'll do is we will run the phishing assessments so that the users will click on them, and hopefully, and we can then gauge the amount of education that a business might need in order to train their users. In the last 2 weeks, we ran basically ran a phishing assessment, sending an email to all the users of 2 different companies. And it was about a new working from home policy for that company. And but it wasn't actually from that company, it was from us pretending obviously to be that company. And in one site, they had 100 users and 9% of them clicked on the link. And on the other one, over 30% clicked on it. And all it would take is for one of those users to fall victim, and it would likely cause some immeasurable harm to that business. On the defensive side, we do a lot of security design, firewalls, intrusion prevention systems, basically trying to produce defense in depth, so that if one piece of the security puzzle is broken, then hopefully there'll be another of other mechanisms to back that up. We do a lot around security monitoring. We've got a security operations center based in the Isle of Man. We've got analysts in the US, in North Carolina, one in South Africa at the moment, and a few more in the UK. And basically they're monitoring the client's networks, looking for issues. And we'll come on to some of their findings shortly. And then we've got cyber threat intelligence, which sounds very glamorous, but basically all it is looking for exactly what it says in the tin. What is going to happen? What threats are currently that might pertain to the clients? So what we're seeing at the moment, we're seeing a lot of COVID-19 phishing attacks. With the, some of the problem is a lot of businesses have asked their users, who are usually in the safety of an office, to go home. And quite often they don't have laptops. They don't have any mechanism from which to work. So they will be using home PCs, or they'll be buying them off the shelf and leaving themselves vulnerable. Now, the hackers and the criminals out there, they go on to like a feeding frenzy as they try to take advantage of all these vulnerable hosts in order to extort money through various means. There's also, while we're talking extortion, there's an awful lot of COVID-19 online scams, selling PPE, even bank loans and other financial help, in order to try to, again, extort money from people. The SOC are also seeing a lot of scanning for virtual private networks. Some of the reason is obviously users have gone, they're now working remotely, and they need to get into the corporate network. So the corporate networks have had to quickly, in some cases they've already got them, but they may have to set up the virtual private networks. And by doing so in haste, it makes them vulnerable. And then if the hackers can find these vulnerabilities, they will exploit them. Remote desktop protocol, this is used a lot in Windows. So if you've got a Windows server, you don't want to be logging onto the server itself, so you want to log on remotely. And this enables users, system administrators, etc., to manage and run the servers within an organization. Now that they're working remotely, they need to try and still get in there. What some businesses have done, they've opened RDP up to the internet, so that their sysadmins can still get in and manage. Unfortunately, it can be quite vulnerable. So again, it's being looked for in earnest. We're also seeing numerous breaches. There's been quite a number this week. I think it was 29 million unemployed Indians or had all of their credentials leaked. And there's EasyJet as well, which I'll come on to. So if you do have an EasyJet account, and you haven't done so already, I would change your password straight away. A lot of the credentials have been leaked, and especially if you're using, if your EasyJet password, or you've got an EasyJet account and you're using that same password anywhere else, change the password everywhere you can, because once the credentials are leaked, the attackers will use your same username and password combination in as many different sites as they can, in order to try to compromise your other accounts. This is just, I'm going to go through a few now, and you're probably looking at the time, need to speed it up a wee bit. So this is just an Italian group, or they're targeting Italians with fake infection maps. Easy for me to read, they've got all stuff over my screen. So these are just a few of the other bits. What I wanted to do was look at some of the, those that are targeting researchers such as yourselves, and try to emphasize that your research, your intellectual property is extremely valuable to other people. And it's not just coronavirus research, it's any kind of university type research that is being targeted. So the World Health Organization, they've been severely attacked, trying to, and its nation states trying to find out what they know about coronavirus, and try to, I think different nations are just trying to make sure that their research is up to date. And they got the other side of the spectrum, where you've got hackers who have managed to, you've got other researchers, sorry, it's got a thing pop up on my screen asking someone to come in, where they've actually found these, or they've hacked into someone's account. They've got these research papers and they've released them to everyone who wants them. And again, pharmaceutical biotech industry looking for credentials to basically take it, basically try and get the research again. It's been quite substantial, the marked increase in attacks against any kind of research, but especially around coronavirus. Obviously, what you're working on is your intellectual property. I'm going to rattle through this. Someone said earlier on it's self-explanatory. So basically, your research is of interest to nation states. Industrial espionage, people want that research in order to either extend their own knowledge or to sell it on to other people. And I've said protect your research from yourself. I'll explain why a little bit later. I've got a few sons who have been through university, and I was constantly getting calls about how they've lost their backups, how they've lost their USB sticks, how the laptops weren't working. So again, just to try to make sure that you protect that data. And also from your peers, we do an awful lot around insider threat, and that's people within an organization taking information from that that organization to either sell or to use themselves. And there's no reason why that can't be also relevant to universities. These are just some of the old, this is from October of last year, and it was a claim by National Cybersecurity Center. about Chinese spies on universities. And again, cyber gangs here going after information. This was a few years ago. But what I'm trying to say is universities are very much a target by so many different organizations and nation states because they want the information within. So simple precautions you can do. Obviously, we mentioned earlier on about phishing. I gave an 8-hour presentation not that long ago about all sorts of different threats to a particular organization, covering online dating, but specifically and mainly around phishing and what people shouldn't do. Within 2 days of finishing that, someone came to me and said, oh, I've gone and clicked on a link, and as soon as I did it, I thought I shouldn't have done that. We can all patching your operating systems, patching applications that are sat on your systems, your laptops, your desktops, whatever. Consider encrypting your hard drive and also your USB sticks. Back up your research. Now, I would suggest that USB sticks are great for backing up using hard drives, external hard drives, but I'd also suggest using cloud in order to, such as Microsoft OneDrive. There are Google alternatives and other alternatives out there. It just means that that information stands a better chance of being found if you happen to mislay it somehow, or accidentally delete it, or you have a catastrophic hardware failure. It's worth paying for antivirus. It's only about £50 a year, but it gives you so much more in the way of facilities than the unpaid for, the free versions. We mentioned before about using the same passwords, and consider using a password manager which will store different password for everything and hopefully store it securely and somewhere where you can get at those passwords. I would say this is the really big one, is multi-factor authentication. We're trying to talk businesses everywhere into using it. As we mentioned before about breaches, if your credentials have been breached, every man and his dog will be using those credentials to try to get your get into your email, etc. And if you've got multi-factor authentication, so basically what that is it's usually an app on your mobile phone, or there are other ways of doing it as well. But it means that they don't just need your username, your password. They have to have usually a physical thing as well, such as your mobile phone, before they can actually access your emails or your data. You'll be pleased to know that that is it. And the clock stopped. How did I do for time? It's about spot on, isn't it?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. That was a great talk. That was really, really interesting and really relevant. Does anyone have any questions for Andy? Because if not, I will ask them. I've been writing.
I've got one if you don't mind me going first. Basically, I just want to know, how do I know if I've been breached? How do I?
Well, funny old thing. I've got. Let me just bring something up. Let me share another screen. Oh, here we go. I've literally got 5 screens in front of me, and I'm forever trying to find which screen I've got things on. Here we go. Let me share this. Right. Can you see that? You should see, have I been pwned?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So what I'll do is I'll show you mine first of all, so you can see what a bad one looks like. So I've had this same email address for 15 years, and I use it on lots of different sites. So for instance, when LinkedIn got breached, my credentials were lost. When MyFitnessPal got breached, my credentials were in there. British Airways, and there's another one as well. So if I click on that, can you see it's come up red there, and it's saying, oh no, you've been pwned. Pwned is just a slang term for being breached, owned. And it says I've been breached 4 times. What that means is that my username, as in my email address, and in some of the cases, the password that I used on those sites has been breached. Luckily, I don't use the same password everywhere, so that probably saved my bacon, but I am being brute forced all the time. So basically, brute force means that the attacker is using my email address, and each time they use a slightly different password until they basically manage to break in. But because I've got multi-factor authentication, they're not going to be successful. Does that answer you? Are there any volunteers who would like to?
So anyone can actually just go onto this website and put in their email, basically.
Yes, haveibeenpwned.com.
Cool.
If you're feeling brave, Rafa, do you want to give me your email address?
Yeah, why not? You can put my Cardiff one. So put that BA.
Sorry, say again.
BA.
BA.
DE.
BE.
Double L. R. At cardiff.ac.uk.
At TARDIS.
At cardiff.ac.uk. So
It's like a TARDIS, and it's come from the right dot act.uk.
ac.uk.
Yeah. Have a look on the screen. Is that right?
Yeah. Oh, you got a V instead of a D. Oh.
Yeah, you have. You've been breached. Sorry. So what you can do, I don't want to do it, but what you can do is go onto the site and you can start to find out by registering which site you've been breached on. So which I mean, it's not such a bad thing if you're not the worst one I've seen. We had a client come to us, ironically, he was a lawyer, and we ran a check. It wasn't using this, it's using a different tool. And he'd been breached 14 times, and 9 of those times he'd used the same password. We didn't go to him for any legal work, but there. So that's any more questions?
I think we've got one from Stephanie saying she's wondering, how can you be sure you're not being hired by the bad guys to find the weaknesses in a company they're interested in hacking?
Oh, right, okay. We've got what we call an authority to proceed. So we go through some stringent checks and in order for a company to engage us, we'd run checks on the company, but also the individuals, and the individual who signs it off needs to be a director within that company. What happens is we will reverse check. So they'll give us an IP address, and we'll make sure that they own that IP address before we start to scan it.
Fantastic. Any more questions? Has anyone else got anything they want to ask? We've got a comment as well from Lucas saying that you can actually use Have I Been Pwned to protect your domain too. So yes, it's a pretty powerful tool. And Catherine Williams asking, what should you do if you've been breached other than changing password, or is that it? Is that the only thing you can really do?
If you've got multi-factor authentication, that's great. But what you need to be aware of, if your email address has been compromised, then it's a risk management decision. You think about, okay, that email address has been compromised, my password's been changed, but that email address is now on the open market, and people will be trying to break into my email forever. And it might be worth considering changing your email address. We don't do it. We've got one employee who's been breached lots of times, and we are considering, because of the hammering that the email address is getting, we are considering putting a numeral 2 on the end of her username, email address. And leaving both of them active for about 6 months, and then retiring her breached one.
Fantastic. I think is anyone? Okay, one more question. So from Ed, what's the best advice you can give to family members on how to avoid phishing in COVID? He's had 3 family members send a fake link just yesterday for free Domino's to help families during COVID within the space of 5 minutes. But luckily he spotted the URL was a bit dodgy himself, and Googled it, and seems to have caught a lot of people out.
There's a thing called OpenDNS. So when you configure your router, your broadband routers, your ADSL links, your laptops, etc. It's got a thing called DNS settings. So you go into the advanced properties of IPv4, and you can set OpenDNS, the IP address for that, as your, and what that will do is when you click on these links, it will know whether that link is bad. Some of the antivirus solutions you've got were mentioned earlier about paying for them. They will include that sort of DNS security functionality and warn you before going to a bad website. I think it's McAfee, they've got Web Advisor, and they will include that as a free service. So there's a number of different products you can do to prevent some of that. If you're using Gmail and Office 365, so your Microsoft Online, that sort of, those email addresses, there are quite often settings in there where you can adjust the anti-phishing and anti-spam settings.